You know, there's something quietly extraordinary happening in every conversation you've ever had. While words move across the surface, polite greetings, familiar stories, the choreography of social interaction, another language is unfolding beneath it all. A language older than speech. A language you've been speaking and receiving your entire life, even if no one ever taught you to notice it. We were raised to ignore it, weren't we? To believe people are sealed mysteries, impossible to read, their inner worlds locked behind walls too thick to penetrate. But what if that has never been true? What if every person you've ever met has been revealing themselves constantly in their pauses, their projections, their sudden brightness, their carefully crafted calm? What if the stories they avoid, the jokes they overuse, the tension in their posture, are all confessions they don't know they're making? Learning to read this hidden language is not about manipulation. It's about clarity. And once you understand it, the world becomes strangely transparent. People stop looking confusing and instead begin to look human, tender, frightened, longing, shaped by histories they never learned how to name. If you allow yourself to drift a little deeper into these ideas, something subtle may begin to shift a new way of seeing the signals people reveal. Not with judgment, but with a quiet compassion that widens every connection. And if these words awaken something familiar inside you, that gentle desire to understand yourself and others more honestly, I'd be grateful if you like this video and subscribe to the channel. Not for the numbers, but so we can keep exploring these deeper layers of human nature together. Now take a slow breath, let the noise settle, and step with me into the subtle language people speak without even knowing. The mask we forget we're wearing. There's a quiet strangeness to the way we move through the world. We speak, we smile, we explain ourselves, all while believing we are showing others who we really are. Yet beneath every word sits a soft, invisible layer of protection, a mask shaped not by vanity, but by wounds we no longer remember how to name. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "Every profound spirit needs a mask." And he wasn't speaking about deception. He was speaking about survival. A mask is never random. It is always a compensation, a deliberate inversion of the very thing someone fears they truly are. The person who insists loudly on their honesty is often hiding a history of small, quiet lies, not to others, but first to themselves. The one who fills every hour with tasks and movement is rarely disciplined. They're running from a silence that feels too revealing, too intimate, too close to the rawness they've spent years avoiding. And sometimes the mask becomes a whole identity, polished and rehearsed until it feels like truth. Think of someone like Marcus, the man who crafted himself into an unshakable presence, the friend who never breaks, never bends, never lets anything get to him. But if you look closely, you can feel the outline of a frightened child inside that armor, a child who once learned that showing emotion meant being hurt. That child never disappeared. He simply grew older and built a fortress around himself. When you begin to see masks this way, not as manipulation, but as protection, something changes inside you. Judgment becomes impossible, because you sense the quivering thread beneath the performance, the longing to be seen without being exposed, the hope to be loved without risking abandonment. You stop reacting to the persona, and you start hearing the quiet tremor behind it. Alan Watts once said, "We seldom realize, for example, that our most private thoughts and emotions are not actually our own." When you witness the mask through this lens, you recognize that each person is simply guarding the most tender part of themselves. Reading the mask isn't about unmasking someone. It's about understanding what the mask is trying so desperately to protect. And with that understanding, your presence softens. You respond with gentleness rather than confrontation, curiosity instead of accusation. A new kind of vision opens one that looks past the surface without violating it. Once the mask loses its power to deceive you, something quieter begins to glow beneath the surface, a faint shimmer in the psyche, hinting that the performance others present is only a fraction of their truth. Follow that shimmer carefully, for it reveals the next hidden layer, the place where our deepest fears slip outward as judgment, projected onto others long before we notice the confession being made. Projection and the unintentional confession. There's a strange moment that occurs when you stop listening to the surface of someone's words and begin listening to the currents moving underneath. A flicker in the eyes, a tightening of the jaw, a tone that sharpens too quickly, all of it becomes a quiet map of the unconscious they never meant to reveal. Alan Watts understood this with remarkable clarity. He often reminded us that the unconscious speaks first, long before the mind knows what it has said. Projection is where this truth becomes almost eerie. It is the mind's quiet sleight of hand, taking what feels unbearable inside and placing it onto someone else, hoping no one will notice the switch. If you wish to see a person's deepest wound, look to what they condemn with the most intensity. The sharper their judgment, the more fragile the part of themselves they're trying to bury. The one who mocks weakness is fighting their own trembling. The one irritated by attention seekers carries a hidden ache to be seen. The one who demands perfection is outrunning a life built on fear of inadequacy. Every severe criticism is simply a confession delivered in disguise, a sideways admission of what haunts them from within. Nietzsche captured this with unsettling precision. What we hate in others is what we cannot bear in ourselves. And the more you observe people, the clearer this becomes. You begin to sense how the loudest disdain often hides the softest wound. This realization doesn't make you harsher. It dissolves judgment. You start to see the frightened child behind the arrogance, the shame behind the hostility, the exhaustion behind the pretense of strength. The performance becomes transparent, and a deeper kind of silence starts to speak the silence. What's described as the real conversation, where avoidance, tension, and sudden shifts reveal more than any spoken sentence. Somewhere in the quiet space beneath this understanding, another truth begins to breathe faint at first, like a shadow preparing to step into light, ready to unveil the deeper patterns guiding every human heart. The silence that speaks the loudest. Silence has a way of revealing what speech tries to hide. Alan Watts once said, "To listen is to allow the quiet spaces to speak, and the older you get, the more undeniable that becomes." Words can be polished, rehearsed, reshaped into something socially acceptable. But silence doesn't negotiate. It simply exposes. When someone pauses a moment too long, when their voice loses its texture, when an energy shift sweeps across the conversation like a shadow passing over water, something inside them is confessing itself without permission. I once knew a woman who could talk endlessly about her childhood, her friends, her work, her voice warm, vivid, full of color. But whenever someone asked about her marriage, she would smile brightly and say, "Oh, he's great, we're great," then pivot to literally any other subject. You didn't need to be a detective to understand what that silence meant. The emptiness inside, that brightness, the speed of that deflection, the way her words suddenly lost their life. She was telling you everything by telling you nothing. The absence of detail, the lack of texture, the hollow cheerfulness, those were the signals speaking louder than any complaint ever could. Silence is never blank. Silence carries fingerprints. It reveals avoidance, longing, embarrassment, grief. It shows where the soul flinches. And when you learn to listen not to the words, but to the tremor beneath them, you begin to see how much of human truth lives in what is left unsaid. The virtue that speaks too loudly. There's a certain strangeness in human nature, a small theatrical flicker that appears whenever someone tries too hard to show you who they are. Nietzsche captured this with unsettling precision when he wrote, "Loudly proclaimed virtues are often vices in disguise." And once you start seeing it, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. A person who is genuinely kind doesn't need to announce their kindness. It moves through them quietly, like light filtering between leaves. A person who is honest doesn't wear honesty as a badge. It shows itself in the steadiness of their eyes, in the way their actions align with their words without needing applause. True qualities never perform. They simply are. But when someone insists that you notice their virtue, when they tell you they are generous, loyal, principled, authentic, what you're hearing is less a declaration and more a confession. It is the sound of someone trying to outrun an inner fear, persuading themselves of a goodness they don't fully trust they possess. The louder the virtue, the deeper the doubt. I've watched this unfold more times than I can count. The person who preaches authenticity the loudest is often the one whose life feels the most manufactured. The one who can't stop speaking about integrity will quietly bend their values the moment it becomes convenient. And the friend who declares unwavering loyalty at every opportunity often turns out to be loyal only to the image they want you to see. It isn't malice. It's fear. Fear of being exposed. Fear of being ordinary. Fear of being seen without the costume. Understanding this softens the gaze. Instead of reacting to the performance, you begin to notice the trembling beneath it, the human longing to be enough. Virtue, when real, doesn't need an audience. It breathes on its own. The moment virtue stops dazzling you, another dimension opens, a place where people speak through the things they repeat, even when they believe they're hiding, the loops that confess what words cannot. Human behavior often reveals its most honest truths in the patterns we repeat, the small, familiar circles we walk, even when we claim we want to move forward. Each repetition is like a faint fingerprint left on the psyche, a clue pointing toward a wound that was never fully understood. And if you pay quiet attention, you'll notice how these loops speak louder than any confession ever could. A person retells the same story over and over, polishing it as if a different version might finally free them from the ending they never accepted. Another keeps choosing partners who cannot meet them, replaying the first experience of being unseen, hoping that this time the story will change. Someone else begins to rise success, love, momentum, and then dismantles it piece by piece, moved by an unseen force within them that quietly repeats the same old message that they were never worthy in the first place. These aren't conscious choices. They are the survival strategies of a much younger self, still trying to finish a sentence that life interrupted too early. Once you recognize this, a deeper truth starts glowing beneath the surface. Reading another person is not truly an act of understanding them. It is an act of remembering yourself. The masks you notice, the fears you sense, the patterns you decode, they only stand out because some part of you has lived a version of them. Nietzsche whispered this recognition with unsettling clarity in Beyond Good and Evil. If you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. The abyss is not darkness. It is a mirror. And when that mirror comes into focus, judgment loses its edge. You stop seeing difficult people and start seeing frightened children wrapped in adult stories. Manipulation stops making sense because you recognize that no one is hiding strength. They're hiding the places that still hurt. Even loneliness begins to loosen its grip, not because someone arrives to fill the space, but because you finally understand that every person you meet is carrying a variation of the same ache. Approaching others from this place softens everything. You stop demanding perfection and start noticing the tremble beneath their defenses. You learn to set boundaries without bitterness, to say no without closing your heart. And the strange paradox is that the more gently you meet someone's armor, the less they feel the need to wear it. In that ease, the mask begins to slip off by itself. We've wandered through masks and projections, through silences that spoke louder than words, through the quiet loops people return to when old wounds still breathe beneath the surface. And as all of it settles, a softer realization begins to rise. What you recognize in others has always been something you've met within yourself. Every defense you noticed, every crack beneath someone's confidence, every story they avoided or repeated, it resonates because, in some shape or form, you've carried a version of it too. This was never about gaining an advantage or decoding people like riddles. It's about learning to see with gentleness, to meet others as mirrors rather than mysteries. With that shift, judgment loses its force, compassion becomes natural, boundaries become clearer, and connection stops being something you chase. It unfolds the moment both people stop pretending they're untouched by life. Perhaps the quiet truth in all of this is that clarity softens loneliness. When you truly see someone, something inside you loosens, and you no longer feel as alone in your experience. If these reflections stirred something familiar in you, a softening, a recognition, a sense of coming home, I'd be grateful if you liked this video and subscribed. Your presence keeps these conversations alive, and sharing this with someone who may need it could be a gift they didn't know to ask for. You've listened long enough, now simply be. This is Alan Watts's Illusion. Thank you for listening, for feeling, for being here today. See you next time.